They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Loan you that college promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price of being warned. Don't be alarmed. Disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone break ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogueways, I'm honored to be sitting with one of the few people I know who is brave enough to discuss even the most taboo of ideas, and to do so with an emotional detachment that is honorable in this hyper-emotional world of reactivity. And last time we talked about the Hollow hoax, and this time we are diving into the straight-up ridiculousness that is one of the most obvious conspiracies of all time, and yet one that is almost always misunderstood. Get ready to have your mind blown about the JFK assassination as we look at aspects you've never even heard of. He is the historian and author, the host and academic, the expert on propaganda, and the truth teller himself, Cory Hughes. Thank you for being here tonight, and how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for that introduction.
You're welcome. I like to try to embarrass the shit out of everyone right at the beginning so that they're.
I got everything but prophet and seer in there, so cool.
I'll put that in for next time. I'll make a note of that. You're right. So I'm going to give a shout out to Content Safe. They are the best content. Content Safe keeps your content safe and uploaded to every single platform, so you don't have to do all of that. So if you're in the biz and you want that, it is such a cool option. Go to Content Safe and get it for yourself. Also, all of you supporters out there, I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for loving the show, liking the show, commenting, sharing, telling people about it, joining us in the Telegram chat, joining us in rogue.locals.com, supporting on subscribestar.com/rogue-ways or on Apple Podcasts. You can get the audiobook of my book, Sine Curve of Aeons, on Audible. You can get the paper copies on my site at rogueways.org with a channeled inscription just for you, as well as some orgone. You can book one-on-one healing sessions with me there. All of that's at rogueways.org. Infinite gratitude to all of you. Thank you so much for being here and for being you. And Cory, the pointless question of the episode is, what is the best ice cream flavor and why?
Oh, Rocky Road, because it's got everything.
You were just ready for that. You have that answer down.
Yeah, I've eaten a lot of Rocky Road.
Duh. I feel like your sound is actually normal. Did you change your microphone? Usually on day 0, we're having to put you at the lowest setting possible because you're blowing everything out, but I think it's normal again.
No, my volume's just down as usual. So.
Huh. Well, Brad, we got it. Well, I know last time, like we said, we dove into the Hollow hoax. If anyone didn't see that episode, you should absolutely go watch it or listen to it on podcast. It's called Bodies Don't Burn and Other Truths with Cory Hughes, and that was so much fun. So you're, of course, back now to talk to us about JFK. Was that your first sort of conspiracy rabbit hole? Is that how it went? I'm sure you didn't dive straight into the Hollow hoax. Most people don't, at least.
Well, I mean, I've been dabbling in JFK since I was a kid, right? I knew the official conspiracy theory, right? Because there is an official conspiracy theory, right? The JFK movie by Oliver Stone, propagandist, funded by a Mossad spy, Arnon Milchan, who admits now that he was involved in the smuggling of nuclear triggers out of the country to Israel. So, yeah. I knew the official conspiracy theory, and even the official conspiracy theory, which a lot of people still actually believe is what happened, that is most certainly not what happened, right? I found in studying history that you have these different layers to the conspiracy, right? So right now everyone thinks that fucking man, right?
Yeah.
That's the official conspiracy theory, right? It's wrong. But it's still the official conspiracy theory, right? With Kennedy, it's more like the CIA killed Kennedy, right? That's the official conspiracy theory. And that's partially true. The CIA involved, but really in understanding Kennedy and anything else that's gone on in the world since 1947, you need to understand the pecking order, the hierarchy, the global power structure. And nobody does. And nobody ever takes this part of the equation into consideration when they do their Kennedy research. It's always the CIA did it, right? Well, who the fuck does the CIA work for? Because it ain't the American government. And when you figure out who the CIA works for, that's when the whole world starts to fall into place. Not just Kennedy, but everything that's going on, right? So, yeah. But no, I got into the Holocaust and World War II back in like 2015, 2016, before I was doing this, full time. And really, I had gone through a full education, a couple years, 2 or 3 years on World War II and propaganda and the Holocaust before even getting to Kennedy. And in my opinion, I don't even think it's possible to understand Kennedy without understanding that long, sordid history, not only of American intelligence, but of the study of propaganda and how information is disseminated, right? Like, because that's very relevant to Kennedy, because from the day of the assassination, within minutes, we started getting propaganda stories, right? Pushing all the way through that have shaped that official conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And so understanding propaganda is like fucking the most important thing if you want to understand anything going on in the world. And when you understand what propaganda is used for, and how it's meant to hide and shuffle around the truth, right? You can really get a much better understanding of the world when you understand what's true and what's not. Like, I see these dumb fucks on Twitter promoting like save Ukraine and all this shit, and I'm like, these are the dumbest fucking people that have ever walked the earth. Like, they have a computer in front of them. They obviously don't know how to use it. They've never opened a fucking history book. They don't understand anything about modern geopolitics, right? And it's like, these people are a product of propaganda.
Ooh, can I tell you my favorite one recently? I said
Sure.
something about how these wars are always bankers' wars. They're always profiting the bankers, and someone on TikTok, of course, was like, "Oh yeah, well, like, who in Wells Fargo is going to make a bunch of money?" And I was like, "Well, first of all of them, but that's not who I'm talking about when I say bankers, you fucking moron." I'm like, "Have you heard of like the World Bank, the IMF, and the Fed, or these types of centralized sorts of institutional banks that go back for how long? I don't even know." And they were like,
Nobody
"Well, see,
knows.
what you don't understand is supply side economics." I'm like, "Oh my god, there's like no way to even talk to you, or clearly can't have a conversation, because you're so far into that propaganda that you just never have
Right.
questioned anything."
Like, recently I was having a conversation with a family member, and 9/11 came up, and he's like, "Man, 9/11 changed everything. How Al Qaeda double crossed us." And I'm like, this just terminate the conversation right here, because it's going to take years for this person to catch up to what's really going on. So
You just
but
pat
yeah,
them on the
sifting
head
through,
and hand them a hot cocoa and go, "It'll be okay."
understanding the intelligence community and how they operate is of utmost importance. Understanding tradecraft and the use of aliases and how those work, and body doubles and all that stuff. I mean, that stuff is very real, and those techniques of tradecraft were incorporated into the Kennedy assassination, starting years before the assassination itself, with Lee Harvey Oswald and the numerous people who were impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald. So, yeah, understanding this modus operandi of tradecraft and all the various aspects that go into tradecraft, and the lengths that they're willing to go to create plausible deniability, it's really stunning, really stunning.
The links that they'll go to, by the way, include things like QAnon. Because QAnon now is the official way to dismiss JFK conspiracies, even the official conspiracy. It's all QAnon. All of it. Like, and so they crafted this whole entire online community and all of the stuff that gets disseminated from there, in part to address this, right? But also any other conspiracy that comes up. And it doesn't matter if you point out QAnon started in like, what, 2016? I don't even know. JFK happened when? How is this QAnon? But
Mhm.
people are right. But what? So I just want to pause because tradecraft. When you say tradecraft, I think spycraft. I have no idea what
Mhm.
tradecraft even means.
Yeah, it's spycraft.
Okay.
That's the official term for it. It's
Okay.
tradecraft. So,
So when that Chinese lady had sex with Eric Swalwell before and after he farted live on national television, that was tradecraft.
that was tradecraft,
Okay,
right?
got it.
So, um, but when you try to explain to people who are not privy to this kind of information, and you explain to them that setting the they were kind of setting everything up in advance of the assassination for years when it came to Lee Harvey Oswald. They had people going into all kinds of public places, making a scene, making sure to give his name, have conversations about communism and all this stuff. And there are dozens of incidents of this occurring while Oswald was still provably in the Soviet Union, right?
Huh.
So when you look back at Kennedy and you look at the tradecraft they were implementing, they were really sloppy, right? But you have to think of the mindset of these people. Um, there was no internet. They had no idea that anyone would be able to get actual documents and records of their activities 50 years later. Photographs, be able to pinpoint people's locations and basically map out everything that happened in the assassination. And part of the part of it given away by their own mistakes in how they executed tradecraft, right? Like they should not have had anybody impersonating Oswald while Oswald was in the Soviet Union, but they did. And not only in New Orleans, but in Miami, right? So allegedly, Oswald was arrested in Miami. He was seen twice demonstrating for Fair Play for Cuba Committee down in Miami back in like 1961, 62. And this was attested to by people like Frank Sturgis, CIA, so you can't really trust those accounts of it. But there is enough evidence of cover up of incidents of Oswald having been in Miami during those times, and it's pretty obvious something was going on involving Lee Harvey Oswald. But again, Oswald was in the Soviet Union at this time. However, when you end up going through all my research and end up really coming to get a grasp on what happened during the assassination, you come to find that there were multiple people, specific people, impersonating Oswald with the intent of setting him up for the assassination. Two men in particular, one named William Seymour and one named Terry Thornley. And so I'll get to talking about them a little more in depth. But at the time of the sightings of Oswald and the alleged arrest of Oswald in Miami, where he's protesting on behalf of Fair Play for Cuba Committee, William Seymour is known to have been living in Miami at that particular time. And so when you look at the various sightings of Oswald and where he was and what he was doing, basically, over the year and a half period that Oswald was back from the Soviet Union prior to the assassination, I cannot pin any of the known incidents involving Oswald on Lee Harvey Oswald virtually at all. There was a long string of incidents that's supposed to basically create a legend of Oswald as this dissident persona and as a communist and someone who ordered a rifle, right? The Carcano rifle and a handgun and all this stuff. But when you really start to dig into every single incident, you'll come to find that Oswald was not involved in any of it. Oswald is alleged to have gone to Mexico City and tried to get a visa to get into Cuba. That whole thing, if you ask me, was another botch in their tradecraft, another botch in attempting to set up Oswald, because I found absolute proof of Oswald being in New Orleans still at the time that the Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have been in Mexico City. And then when you look at the Mexico City trip, you'll find they sent multiple people with the name Oswald to Mexico City at the same time. Like one guy's name was Oswald, spelt with two S's, Osswald. He worked for Naval Intelligence. And the same exact days Lee Harvey Oswald was in Mexico City, he was in Mexico City on behalf of Naval Intelligence. And his assignment was to hand out flyers, pro-American flyers, on campuses at the university down there in Mexico City. So they did all kinds of weird stuff. There's another a Cuban Oswald named Osvaldo who's involved in all this stuff too. But it's really crazy when you get into like the CIA and how they group people together for operations. Like David Ferrie in New Orleans, he had 4 or 5 guys who were around him at all times, and the description of these guys on paper is identical. 5'9", light brown hair, thin build, 17 to 20, early 20s. So whenever something went down involving these people, when you got a description from a witness, good luck on trying to figure out who it was, because the description matches all the guys in David Ferrie's inner circle. So this is more tradecraft tactics. That tells me a lot of the relationships that David Ferrie had in New Orleans were established by someone higher up than him, or he was instructed to make contacts in this, using this methodology, right? Grouping people together by specific physical traits.
As well as names sometimes. It reminds me of how, part of the reason seemingly that they will do a drill and then at the same time have the drill go live, like 9/11 and like a lot of these other things, is to make it like as confusing as possible for everyone when they look back and they're trying to like figure out what happened or where, who, or what was what. That's what this reminds me of, right? Let's have as many guys as we can named Oswald. Let's have as many guys as we can that look the same and just make it as confusing as possible.
Yeah. I mean, that's the very nature of tradecraft, which has one goal, and that's to create plausible deniability, right? If you're not talking about direct espionage and trying to like lose a tail and stuff like that, what you're talking about is implementing these techniques to create plausible deniability, which is a reasonable explanation for why you didn't do something, right? It's your excuse. So we didn't do it. Oswald did it. He ordered the rifle, see? Right? So, and when you look at Oswald in particular, I mean, he is most certainly one of the most misunderstood people in history. The image that people have in their mind of who Oswald is. I mean, we know that he defected to the Soviet Union, right? Alleged communist, all this stuff. When you start to dig into the various aspects that comprise his communist bona fides, once again, they all fall apart. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee, great example. Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which was like the proof that he was a communist, and he opened up this chapter down in New Orleans, and he had documents and all this stuff. Well, turns out that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was a CIA front, and it had always been a CIA front. And the story of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is great. I'll tell it because it doesn't get told very often. But the Fair Play for Cuba Committee started in October of 1960. And in October of 1960, Fidel Castro was not our enemy, still on our side. So the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, but I think at the time the embargoes were still in place on Cuba. The Congress hadn't lifted the embargoes against Cuba, and Fidel Castro had just taken over power. And so the Fair Play for Cuba Committee started out as an organization that was supposed to, like everything the CIA does, gather money, launder money, all that stuff. But it was supposed to kind of be pro-Cuban and pro-Castro in as far as getting Congress to drop the embargoes and allow Cuba to engage in, fair trade with America, hence the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, right? So it's very pro-Cuban, but that's because at the time, Fidel Castro is on our side. He's a we think that he's going to be pro-American, pro-freedom, pro-democracy. He doesn't become a communist for almost 18 months after the Fair Play for Cuba Committee launches, right? And so the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is a pro-Castro organization because he's pro-freedom, he's pro-American. Castro switches to be a communist. What do? Do they denounce him and say, go fuck this guy? No. They switch to communism also. And they start to promote him as a communist. Okay? So for almost 2 years, it's a pro-Castro organization because he wasn't a fucking communist, right? So just the fact that they switched complete ideologies, like 180 degrees, should tell you everything you need to know about the organization. Then when you start to look into like where the initial money came from and who the founders were, I mean, Robert Tabor and Richard Gibson founded the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. These guys were both reporters working for CBS in New York. By then, CBS, Operation Mockingbird, back in '56, they were done by 60, right? So, but then years later, we get documents showing that these guys, they sure as shit were CIA, but they claimed they didn't become CIA until after Castro became a communist, right? So they just changed the dates of when they got involved with the Central Intelligence Agency. But do you really think the CIA is going to go out and recruit these guys who started a fucking pro-communist organization that basically was involved with Lee Harvey Oswald? Give me a fucking break. They'd rather throw those guys in jail. But no, all evidence points to it being a CIA front from the beginning, with the two guys who started it and ran it admitting they worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. It's just a matter of, do you want to believe that they didn't become CIA agents until later? Obviously not. It's total bullshit.
Yeah.
So when you start to dig into Oswald and everything that he is connected to, virtually everything that you find is like a staged event or obviously somebody else. Oswald didn't drink. He was always very neat and clean shaven. There are certain traits about him that are pretty well accepted. But then you'll come across incidents where he's like rude to people and like spitting on the sidewalk and like just demonstrating traits that are, you're like, that's not Oswald. Okay, obvious it's not Oswald. And so then you get into the question, if it's not Oswald, who is it? Right? You have these nutcases who go off on these tangents like, oh, they had a clone of Oswald, or they had some, Now, don't get me wrong. Oswald was definitely involved he was naval intelligence, but he was involved with CIA in some pretty deep fucking programs, right? So my whole thing with Oswald, many people believe that there was a duplicate Oswald throughout his growing up. And it sounds crazy, but I can't help but agree. When you look into the documents that have been uncovered basically by one guy, John Armstrong, wrote the book on this stuff called Harvey and Lee, which basically showed that from the time that Oswald was about 11 or 12 years old, there were two completely different families living in two different cities, sometimes the same city, using the same name, same social security, same everything. And this was kind of outed because of some duplicate school records that showed that Oswald Junior High in Fort Worth, simultaneously going to Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans. And John Armstrong actually was able to track down people at both schools who knew Lee Harvey Oswald at the exact same time that he was at one school, he was at another school. And so interviews with these people are up on YouTube. I mean, people can go watch this stuff, and the descriptions they give of Lee Harvey Oswald are different. He can definitely be placed in different locations at different times, meeting with different people. And it appears as though there were two children who were going by the name Lee Harvey Oswald, who eventually the FBI merged their records into one as best as they could, still leaving some glitches.
Do you think any of this has anything to do with like mind control? I mean, like, why is
no?
There two
okay,
of
that's
no?
So the mind control stuff a little bit, but no, I think this was a plot to get a spy into the Soviet Union. Plain and simple. Nothing like crazy. I really start to go nuts when people go off the deep end. But then again, some of my research is pretty off the fucking deep end.
There's some deep shit out there.
Yeah. But I believe it was a plot to get a spy into the Soviet Union. And then when you look at the CIA and what they were doing between 1959 and 1962, they had a program they were running that was called AR Balcony. And AR Balcony was basically a program that took naturalized citizens, meaning people who were not Americans. They were from another country, but who spoke fluent Russian and spoke fluent Baltic languages is how the actual verbiage says. And then they would take these people and they would send them back to the Soviet Union, to a couple of Lithuania and a couple other places out over there, outside of like Minsk, where Oswald ended up. They would send them back there to be spies. And this program existed from the same years that Lee Harvey Oswald was over in the Soviet Union, from 59 to 62. So, yeah, it's crazy. But he probably was part of this program to take a naturalized citizen. Now, here's the thing: if he was involved in this program and this program used naturalized citizens, well, Oswald's an American; he's not naturalized. But John Armstrong theorized that the duplicate Oswald was actually pulled from some Eastern Bloc country, spoke fluent Russian, and raised under a duplicate identity. And he doesn't really give a why they would do this, but my theory is really simple: to get a spy in the Soviet Union. Imagine if Lee Harvey Oswald, when he goes over to the Soviet Union, he ends up coming back. But imagine if while he's in the Soviet Union, he just vanishes and he's a spy. And then they say, hey, where the fuck is Lee Harvey Oswald? You know? And then the Americans go, oh, well, we got him right here. And they have the other Oswald and say, what are you talking about? Oswald's here in America. You know, while the spy is out doing whatever he's doing because he's a fluent Russian speaker, right?
Weird.
So
Yeah.
it might sound crazy, but what do you think the CIA was willing to do to get a spy into the Soviet Union back in 1952, 1953? Whatever it took.
We've heard of way crazier shit that they've done. So yeah, it sounds a little crazy, but not really when compared with everything we know is real.
No. I mean, they did go as far as giving people like surgery to make them look like other people to sneak them into the Soviet Union. And that's crazier to me than raising a kid under a duplicate identity. And as far as that stuff goes, John Armstrong, the data he gathered is priceless. It's hard to argue with any of it. The problem with him is the conclusions that he drew are just fucking so dumb. It's like it's hard for me to recommend that book that he put out because he attributes all of the actions that we know were not our Oswald, right? So there's a duplicate Oswald. He attributes all of the actions and all of the sightings of Lee Harvey Oswald to this duplicate, right? And that's just wrong. Like, that's just totally fucking wrong. There was only a couple incidents that you can pinpoint was the person he's referring to, but the vast majority of incidents of Oswald being impersonated were done by two guys, William Seymour and Kerry Thornley, two guys who were in David Ferrie's inner circle in New Orleans. So it removes a mysterious who was impersonating Oswald. Was it a clone or was it a fucking twin or what? All the different theories on that make a lot of sense when you come to understand. You have to understand the time and the era, because in 1963, like, your goddamn driver's license didn't even have your picture on it. Okay, so for them to pull the identity shenanigans was easy, right? And so to kind of explain the how people could mistake someone for Oswald when it wasn't Oswald. We'll take an example of him going to the shooting range. Okay, Oswald is alleged to have gone to the shooting range where he shoots at other people's targets, right? Garland Slack, Malcolm Price are the witnesses who put him at the shooting range. A couple others who aren't really important, but he's seen at the shooting range. The official story says he went there once, shot at other people's targets, and these people identified him. But when you really dig into it, you realize he was there at least 5 times over a 5-week period. He had his rifle worked on there, and the guy said it was a Mauser 7.65, not the Mannlicher that was worked on. So it obviously is not Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, so when you look at a picture of William Seymour, and if you look at the picture of Kerry Thornley, both of these guys were same height, same receding hairline, same build, although William Seymour was an inch or two shorter. So they have the same general description. And if someone comes to the shooting range and they start talking about communism and shooting rifles, and after he leaves, you don't see him again, and then he's on the news a month and a half later for having shot the president, you're going to be like, that kind of looks like the guy who was in here. Yeah. But it's not. It doesn't have to be identical. And when you get into CIA tradecraft tactics, they acknowledge that duplicates and their the identical twins and the body doubles and stuff, they don't have to be identical, because number one, if they're not seen at the same time, their appearance won't be scrutinized, right? People will not remember the little details, but they'll remember this guy who was 5'8", 150 pounds, talking about communism, came and let me work on his Mauser, right? Of course, the official story doesn't mention the Mauser at the shooting range. Really, when you dig into all the things that the official story says that Oswald did, it's like, holy shit. They have the evidence that he didn't do it, but they just are saying that he did. It's crazy. If you were, I haven't gone through all 26 volumes of the Warren Commission. It's thousands and thousands of pages unto itself. But when you go through the conclusion, which is all summarized in one book, it paints a very clear picture that Oswald did it. But then when you go through the 26 volumes of appendixes that come with it, it's like, what are you talking about? It completely debunks your thesis, but you're telling us the opposite in the actual summary. It's really fucking unbelievable.
That's what Snopes does. They're like, this is false, and then you read their evidence. You're like, you're not even addressing the thing you said you were addressing. Like, literally, you're not even like close. You're just saying like the word "the" wasn't in the right place or something. Like, it's ridiculous. So that makes sense to me. They are good at that.
Yeah. So there's it's hard to explain how important and how not important Oswald is simultaneously in the assassination. He's the central figure. He's the patsy. He's the one the entire story revolves around. And he's the person who had the least to do with the assassination than anybody else in the goddamn story.
Do you think he knew, was in on it, is still alive, or do you think he's dead? Like, what do you think happened to him?
He was definitely not in on it. Definitely not. And I got one of the things that I've the evidence. I always wonder on how to say this, and I'll say it this way: the evidence points me in a direction that indicates that Lee Harvey Oswald did not work at the book depository, and that was simply a front job for him. When you dig into his other jobs, all of them were associated with the CIA. Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans. 4 other employees of Riley Coffee Company left there to go work for either NASA directly or Michaud or Boeing or some aerospace. But did they really? No, they didn't. Those companies were like hand in glove with the CIA, and they used these companies as front organizations to funnel money and give someone some kind of credentials, real life credentials, so they can go do spy stuff. Yeah. Like that's what a front job is. All these guys had them. William Seymour had a front job down in Miami at Beach Welding. Beach Welding said, "Oh no, he was here during the assassination." Bullshit. He was in Dallas. He wasn't there, and obviously the guy running the company lies for him, and therefore it's obviously a CIA front job. And that's how it was for all of Oswald's jobs. He worked allegedly for a company called Jaggers Child Scoval, which was a military contractor. You needed a top secret clearance just to work there. Allegedly, Oswald was referred there by a temp agency. And so they ended up hiring him. This place was so like top secret that they were one of the companies who was hired by the Pentagon to develop the photos taken by the U-2 as they flew over Russia. That's how top secret this place was. And they hire Oswald as a photo development tech who has no experience as a photo development tech, right? This is after he fucking defects to the Soviet Union, right? And they're going to hire this fucking guy? Are you kidding me? No. I don't think Oswald ever stepped foot into any of the jobs that they say that he had. I just don't. I think they were all front jobs. This idea that he was some broke communist who was just bumming around trying to get attention is just like so stupid. It's really fucking unbelievable.
But it's like you said too, like if you had this person go in pretending to be him and acting like spitting and kicking or whatever, like talking loudly about communism, it's enough to get people's memories to lodge that in there and say like, oh yeah, this guy was like that. And like you said, it doesn't matter if it was actually him or not, if he's actually like that or not. It's just it's the memory and the emotion of it and like the scene that matters.
Right. And so today we have all the videos we can analyze hundreds of hours of everything. None of that was out. For the first couple weeks, right? All they released were still images of Oswald for a couple days until he got shot by Jack Ruby. Like, I mean, it was easy to mistake people, especially if that was your intention, is to deceive them. And you didn't even have to give a name, right? Like at the shooting range, William Seymour never gives the name Oswald, never does. But he left enough of a trail there that people working there after Oswald's arrested, they call and they say, "Hey, I think this guy was in here," and then the FBI does their thing, right? So yeah, when it comes to Oswald, I cannot associate Oswald with any of the known incidents of him, nor can I associate him with the book depository as anything other than a front job. And I have no evidence he was there that day at all. But I have a ton of evidence that William Seymour was there that day, and his 2 associates, who were. This trio is one of the more important set of characters in the entire assassination. William Seymour and his 2 associates, Lawrence Howard and Lauren Hall. So Lauren Hall and Lawrence Howard they're kind of like the mercenary types, and so was William Seymour. William Seymour just happened to look like Oswald, therefore I'm sure that's why he was kind of recruited into this position, because he kind of met the criteria. But he was down in Miami working with a guy named Jerry Hemming. And they set up a group called Interpen, the Intercontinental Penetration Force, which was a purely CIA-funded operation to set up training camps to train anti-Castro Cubans coming over, defecting, or even the exiles who were kicked out of Cuba, right? The boat is coming in to grab these guys up. And so you have Lauren Hall, Lawrence Howard, and William Seymour, who were all either in the Marines, or William Seymour was in the Navy, which leads me to believe he remained in naval intelligence. But they're operating out of Miami, and they're doing stuff with Interpen, training these anti-Castro Cubans. And it's over a period of 2 years that I've traced William Seymour between Miami, New Orleans, Houston, and Dallas, and also actually Phoenix, going basically back and forth over a timeline. And when you look at the official story, it was supposed to be to raise money and stuff, but for the Cuban cause. But ultimately, nobody gave a fuck about the Cubans. That was all a front, and we'll get to that here shortly. But these guys are driving back and forth, and they're making stops in New Orleans and in Dallas and all over the fucking place. And when you take all of the incidents involving Lee Harvey Oswald, like the shooting at General Walker's house, the gun range incident, and particularly in October and November, there was like a 6-week period leading up to the assassination, you'll find that these guys' travels across the country coincide with Oswald sightings, when Oswald was seen with a guy who was dark-skinned, dark-complected. He was often described as a Mexican, with numerous bumps on his face, or possibly a pockmarked face. And so when you look at William Seymour and Lawrence Howard's travels back and forth the country, and then when you look at these Oswald sightings, where Oswald's seen with a fucking Mexican, it's like, duh, it's obviously William Seymour and Lawrence Howard driving back and forth, doing these things that we can document, that we know that they did. And it's just coincidence, I guess, that they're in certain places with these Oswald sightings popping up, right? So that kind of gave me the inclination that, hey, holy shit, William Seymour looked close enough to Oswald that he could impersonate him. And I think that culminated at the book depository, where I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was not there that day. I believe William Seymour was there that day. I believe he was introduced to people at the book depository as Lee Harvey Oswald. He only had a group of like 3 or 4 guys who worked around him all the time, who would really know better. The secretaries throughout the building, they obviously didn't know anything about anything, even though they all worked for CIA-related companies. They're just secretaries in 1963 who gave a shit more about their nails than anything going on in the fucking building, right?
Like, that's why they were chosen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Like when you read the statements of the secretaries and all the women in the building, they didn't know a goddamn thing about anything, because a lot of what they say contradicts with the official story. So I can do some screen share, and I can just to highlight this point, because I think this is one of the things that I kind of discovered that no one else has ever discovered. And even like the most praised JFK researchers, like, I swear to God, they're the dumbest fucking people ever. Guys, people like James DiEugenio and Greg Parker. A lot of these fucking guys are just complete fucking morons, and they keep spinning the community in circles over nothing, right? Like, if you were to go check JFK forum posts from 10 years ago and go check JFK forum posts from last fucking week, they're the same. They're asking the same questions. Nothing has changed. These ignoramuses haven't been able to fucking figure out anything. And the stuff with William Seymour. Go ahead.
Some of them are doing that on purpose?
No.
To keep people like down
I don't think
when shit's up here.
I don't know. It's really hard to say. I mean, there's definitely been COINTELPRO over the years with some bullshit stories coming out in major newspapers. But as far as these forums go, I don't know, because you get some people who troll them, who, like, anytime anyone posts anything, they're like, that's stupid, you conspiracy idiots. But then these people live on the forum. So it's like, I don't give a fuck about flat Earth, but I'm not on their forum 12 hours a day trolling them, Right. So, like, when I see that, I'm just like, what are you doing, buddy? Sometimes these people really just have an ego and they don't understand anything. But But these forums are just horrible. They're just absolutely horrible. Like, avoid them at all costs. If you're interested in Kennedy research, like, here's the thing, like, they're some of the people who post some things in these forums are really good at digging up individual data, right? They'll find a name and they'll give you everything about that name and, you know, who their family was. And that's great. Not a single fucking person out there, James D. Eugenio included, have ever attempted to connect these dots that they've been digging up for 50 fucking years. And Eugenio is such a cop-out. He'll even tell you that, like, oh, I don't even try to identify the shooters. That's not what is important. Oh, go fuck yourself. Of course it's important, because they directly connect to the people that you think is important. So, yeah, identifying the shooters was of paramount importance if you want to understand fucking anything. And then when you understand who the shooters were, it really impacts the relationships involved and, like, how significant certain people were, like David Ferrie. David Ferrie, one of the most important people in American history, period. He was one of the shooters on the grassy knoll. He was one of the shooters of Officer J.D. Tippit. And Garrison had him in his fucking office the Monday after the assassination. Like, Jim Garrison, who was the DA in New Orleans, who, you know, the JFK film was based about him, and really an amazing person. And his research and investigation into Kennedy it's priceless. But he didn't ever realize how close he came to having the actual shooters. You know, he never realized it at all. David Ferrie, who shot Kennedy from the fucking grassy knoll, fired the first shot, not the second shot. He had him in his office, you know, 72 hours after Kennedy gets killed. That's like, holy shit. And honestly, to this very day, no other researcher in Kennedy research has made that realization other than myself and an associate of mine. So, yeah, just the very basics. Like, if you want to understand Kennedy, you need to understand that David Ferrie was in fucking Dallas. That's crucial. And if you don't understand that, you'll never understand anything. And so, yeah, there are no Kennedy researchers out there other than myself who publicly will say that David Ferrie was in Dallas. And of course, he was in Dallas. Why do you think he's so important? Why does his name come up in every conversation? You know? And then when you get into his relationships, his primary relationship in the assassination was to Clay Shaw, who was arrested and charged in New Orleans. And it was the only trial it was the only time anyone was ever put on trial for Kennedy's assassination, other than, you know, all the stuff that went on with Lee Harvey Oswald, but he got killed, right? So Jim Garrison, in making the arrest of Clay Shaw, was like, holy shit, because he was right. Because Clay Shaw was instrumental, because Clay Shaw was the connection between David Ferrie and everyone else. The CIA was already had their hooks into David Ferrie since 47. And Clay Shaw and David Ferrie knew each other going back all the way to 47. And so, yeah, you got two lifelong CIA agents. But when you come to understand who Clay Shaw is, you realize he's the connection to Permindex and Centro Mundial Comercial, which is a monstrosity created by the Mossad and the CIA. And when you really come to understand where Clay Shaw was, especially on November 22nd, he was in Dallas with a guy named Erwin Heyman, who was a representative of the Jewish agency in Switzerland at the time. So you need to come to understand the relationships between Clay Shaw and everyone else he knew in intelligence, because he is one person away from the Swiss Jews and the Mossad and and all the Israelis, Ben Gurion and all that. So yeah, Clay Shaw, super fucking important. When Clay Shaw gets arrested,
heard his name.
You need to watch the JFK movie. I mean, everyone needs to watch it because it'll give you a good overview of everything.
I probably did, but I don't remember names. So I guess maybe I have heard his name, but it didn't stick.
But yeah, so, and that's another thing about Kennedy. Like, Kennedy is the study of relationships. I mean, that's it. It's not a study of, like, forensics or, like, how many bullets were fired or none of that shit. If you want to understand Kennedy, you need to understand relationships, and that's everything. You know, when you understand who is in David Ferrie's inner circle, you know who helped him with the assassination. I mean, it's that simple. All right, so I'm going to find a couple slides in particular to show. Let me see if I got one of William Seymour and these guys.
I feel like a lot of what happens too is similar to what happened with 9/11, where people will just, everything boils down to, they're like, Bush did it. Bush did 9/11. My students would say this a lot. Bush did 9/11. I'm like, okay, what? Like, Bush didn't do 9/11. Bush was in office. Maybe he knew, maybe he helped cover it up. Who knows? But he didn't do it, right? He's not even smart enough to do it. There's much bigger, vaster things going on here, but that is like the lowest level though, where you like come into the conspiracy ad and at least you understand the official story isn't correct. But like you said, there's sort of official and unofficial conspiracies too. So all right, what's this we've got here?
All right, so William Seymour is the guy in the middle. This isn't a really good picture. He's kind of shaggy here, but you can tell here he has a receding hairline. He's thin. You know, he's a young white guy, just like Oswald was. And this is probably 60, 61, because by 63, he had a very pronounced receding hairline. But this is Lawrence Howard on the left. You can see he's got bumps on his face. He's got moles like all over his face.
Yeah.
And when you go through the literature, you'll find that going all the way back to like January of 1960, while these guys were, down in Miami, you'll find that these Oswald sightings pop up with him with a Mexican with bumps on his face or a pockmarked face, and that's obviously Lawrence Howard. Now, people have tried to debate over the years, could it have been this guy? Could it have been that guy? No. I've really, when you come to, like I said, when I try to harp on, like, you need to understand that this is a study of relationships. And when you understand relationships, it becomes really easy to exclude people from your list of suspects, right? When you know you're looking for a guy who looks like Oswald and he hangs out with a Mexican with bumps on his face, you're 100% of the time talking about Seymour and Howard. Like, that's just how it is. And so knowing that, it can really help eliminate a lot of other people, because there are a couple other names that get associated with the pockmarked face, but really they're unimportant when you come to understand like the real relationships between these people. So this is a great example of Oswald was allegedly seen at the Carousel Club. Okay, Oswald did not go to the Carousel Club. The person that we know as Oswald definitely did not go to the Carousel Club. So this is the descriptions of people that we have who were seen. This is like mid-November, I think November 17th, something like that. This is a description of the men who were seen with Oswald in this party at the Carousel Club. So it says, number 2 described as a white male, 30 to 32 years old, 200 pounds, 5 foot 10 inches, stocky build, long black hair, dark complexion, oval face, Mexican or Spanish appearance, numerous bumps on face, believed to have a 1-inch scar on the eyebrow over the left eye. It's another thing I forgot to mention. Lawrence Howard has a scar on his left eyebrow. So it's absolute slam dunk proof that's Lawrence Howard, not anybody else. Yeah. And then here we go. Customer on stage with stripper, white male, 5 foot 10, 35 years old, 180 pounds, flat top, dark hair, dress not recalled, at table with 1 girl, 3 or 4 men. Obviously talking about Lauren Hall on the right side. So then waitress who waited on Wade and 3 men in group, including person believed Oswald. Okay. So you have a group of people, 3 of them, 1 of them looks like Oswald, 1 of them's a fucking Mexican with bumps on his face, and the other one's a white guy, 180 pounds, flat top, dark hair. That's these 3 guys. And these 3 guys admit traveling the country with each other in the months leading up to the assassination. And also, if you rewind the clock and go back to like March and April of 1963, these guys were all traveling back and forth between Miami and California together. So yeah, it's obvious to me that the person who was believed to have been Oswald was most certainly not Oswald. It is most certainly William Seymour in this situation. And so then when you get to like the shooting range incidents, it becomes the same thing. Let me see. I don't know if I have those slides here or not.
I also want to point out that those 3 people look like psychopaths.
They are your typical post-World War II, mid-1950s. Like, they were too young for World War II, right? So they're the generation that came after, and they are basically bloodthirsty mercenaries. Yeah, they're guys that you can pay to do whatever.
They just look, I don't even know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but all of their faces just look like they kill plenty and don't mind it.
Yeah. For sure. But the story of these 3 guys is, to me, I find some of the most fascinating stuff because of a lot of the things that these guys did, like I've already said, have been misinterpreted as being Lee Harvey Oswald. And there's one thing in particular, we'll get to like the mechanics of the assassination, but I really want to talk about William Seymour because he has really been on my mind a lot lately. So after the assassination at about 12:40 p.m. So Oswald allegedly leaves the book depository at 12:33, but he didn't leave the depository at 12:33 if he wasn't there. And the statements of the men who allegedly put him at the depository leaving at 12:33, I have completely debunked all of their statements. They are completely hollow. So, but allegedly Oswald is on a bus by 12:36, gets off a bus and then takes a taxi. I don't think we're going to talk about that too much today. Maybe later on. That leads to the shooting of Officer J.D. Tippit. But at 12:40 p.m., you have numerous witnesses who say that a early 60s Nash Rambler station wagon with a roof rack pulls up in front of the book depository, and that Oswald allegedly runs out of the book depository, down the hill, gets into this Nash Rambler, and then takes off. So even the conspiracy fucks have not figured out this is Lawrence Howard, who owned a 1960 Nash Rambler, and William Seymour. Okay. So, and harping on the William Seymour as Oswald theme in the book depository, I'm going to fast forward to an incident most people probably know about. So the assassination goes down. You know something, actually? Let me talk about the shooters real quick, because that'll seg into this really well. Just remember this light green Nash Rambler, 1960, owned by Lawrence Howard, and that it was William Seymour who was fleeing the building at the time. So let me see here.
I want that car.
Okay, so this is a picture. I was going to show this later, but this is, and you'll notice he's wearing a light brown jacket. No one's ever pointed this out. This is a clip from the Robert Hughes film. You can see his hairline is much more receded than it was in the picture I showed you. He's cleaned up, could potentially be impersonating Oswald, right? So the reason I put him in the book depository is because later on we'll have an incident involving Officer Baker and Roy Truly, who's the manager of the building, and they will put Oswald between the 4th and 3rd floors at about 12:38 p.m. And they say he's wearing a light brown jacket. So that kind of gave me the impotence to believe that William Seymour was actually the one who was walking freely around the book depository and then is stopped after the assassination inside the building in the stairwell wearing this light brown jacket that you're seeing right here. So, all right, let's talk about the gunman real quick. All right, so at the Pergola area, the guy on the left is a guy named Dave Yaris. Dave Yaris is Chicago mob. He was Chicago mob for a very long time. He was an older guy at the time of the assassination, probably in his late 50s or early 60s at the time. He'd been living in Miami, and so the FBI is trying to track this guy. Well, he was a known thug, very high up in the Chicago mob, very well-respected guy. And he basically, they lose track of him about 3 or 4 days before the assassination. And they can't find him until he shows up in Chicago a week after the assassination. Same thing with his partner, Lenny Patrick, another Chicago hitman, who I believe was Dave Yaris' spotter in the assassination here. Basically, Lenny Patrick, they lose track of him. They can't find him again until a week after the assassination. He back in Chicago, and he's with Dave Yaris. So during the time of the assassination, Dave Yaris was AWOL, and they had been trying to track him at the time, and they couldn't. So on top of that, I was able to identify the aliases that Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick used while they were in Dallas. They were staying with in a place next to the Carousel Club, actually, that was owned by a woman named who was associated with Jack Ruby's, and they were using the aliases of David Leon Miller and Isidore Max Miller. And I was able to trace those guys back to Atlanta, and a whole bunch of stuff going on in Atlanta. Talk about that another time. But Dave Yaris, very important person, Chicago mob, sent there by Giancana. Okay. On the right, you have Danny Green, the one and only, the Irishman. Danny Green, most people associate as having been an Irish mobster who had gone to war with the Cleveland mob, which is true. James Licavoli, Angelo Leonardo, Leo Mosseri, those guys all based out of Cleveland. Well, Danny Green, before he was a dick and tried to take over the mob in Cleveland, he actually was a sniper trainer in the Marines. And so when you dig into Danny Green, you'll find he's a relative nobody. And then out of nowhere, he had this meteoric rise to success in Cleveland and the Cleveland mob as the head of the Longshoresman Union. And so when you look at the timing of that, that happened within a couple months of the Kennedy assassination. And before that, he was basically a relative nobody, doing like acting as like a bagman for James Cavoli and the Cleveland mobsters, right? So when you looked at the thing that tipped me off to Danny Green's involvement was the timing and his meteoric rise. How even the newspaper wrote an article like, who the fuck is this guy? Where did he come out of? And then when I got into the three tramps, I identified Danny Green as one of the three tramps. He's the tall tramp, and I think I have a picture I'll get to later on. But I put him behind the pergola. I can't say with absolute certainty that he shot. However, he was a sniper trainer in the Marines. And then after the assassination, he had a meteoric rise in the Cleveland mob as the head of the longshoresmen. He was rewarded. So they're not going to reward this fucking guy, nor are they going to bring a sniper trainer to an assassination and not put a fucking rifle in his hand. So common sense would tell you that Danny Green was one of the assassins, and he was probably behind the pergola, because after the assassination, he flees into the railroad yards, where he ends up getting busted about an hour and a half later. So
this makes a way cooler movie. Like, why don't they make this? And this is like the best season of Fargo ever.
Yes, if there's any millionaire out there who would like to pay me a fat salary and turn this into a movie, I am game.
That would be so rad. We need to make this happen, everyone. Come on. Manifest this.
Okay, on the overpass, Robert Bernard Baker. Robert Bernard Baker did not fire a rifle. However, he was there, and he was a longtime associate of Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris. In the days leading up to the assassination, you have a series of phone calls that goes on between Jack Ruby and Robert Bernard Baker, Dave Yaris, and Lenny Patrick. Kind of over a couple-day period, like these guys are like calling each other. Starts with Jack Ruby calling Robert Bernard Baker. Robert Bernard Baker then calls Dave Yaris. Dave Yaris then calls Lenny Patrick. The last time this happens was the night before the assassination. Well, guess what? These fucking guys were in Dallas. Those were alibi phone calls. Okay, so if you're getting alibi phone calls and you place Yaris and Patrick in Dallas, we know about the relationship between Robert Bernard Baker and Yaris and Patrick. And so this is obviously the guy that Jimmy Hoffa threw in, right? So Robert Bernard Baker was working for Jimmy Hoffa. He was Jimmy Hoffa's right-hand man at the time, but Hoffa worked for, even though Hoffa was out of New Jersey and Robert Bernard Baker's out of New Jersey, they were working there on behalf of the Chicago outfit, right? So they're really Chicago mobsters, even though they're down from New Jersey, under the control of Giancana. So yeah, that's who sent these guys down. I have a picture. We'll get to all the pictures of these guys. I'm just going over preliminarily like who it was. So in the book depository on the 6th floor, in the sniper's nest, Lawrence Howard, Mexican, pockmarked face. All the witnesses who put shooters on the 6th floor described the same thing. They described Lauren Hall. They described Lawrence Howard. One of them even says his face was wrinkled or he had something wrong with his face. Duh, obviously, Lawrence Howard. And these guys work, remember, relationships are everything. These guys work in teams. They have to be very familiar and they trust their fucking teams, right? They're not going to take a straggler along with them. So obviously, if you have the description of these guys on the 6th floor, one of them was 5'10", stocky build, white male, with a white shirt and a brown suit coat, holding a rifle, and the other one is described as heavy-set Mexican, pockmarked face, then you obviously know who they're talking about. And this is who they're talking about. And it was really fucking obvious to me. I don't know where JFK researchers have been for 60 fucking years. This is like the easiest one. And then we have absolute proof that it was Lawrence Howard in the building, and I'll show that before we get done here today. And then at the Daltex building, I'm sorry, the guy on the right, Sergio Arcacha Smith, I believe he fired a shot from the roof because they did find a Mauser 7.65 on the roof of the depository. So they found a Mauser 7.65 in the 5th floor stairwell. They found one on the roof of the, and I believe the shooter at the Daltex also had a Mauser 7.65. And these Mausers were delivered to David Ferry, who flew up to meet a guy named Frank Sheeran, also known as the Irishman. Where Frank Sheeran gave David Ferry a tote bag that had 3 rifles in it. So, pieces have come out over the years. It's just frustrating that people are taking forever to put them together. But yeah, that's Sergio Smith on the right. He is a former Cuban diplomat, exiled to America, involved in all kinds of CIA anti-Cuban operations, but the CIA really didn't give 2 fucks about Cuba. All the money that was raised and the weapons and all that stuff, they never made it to the fucking Cubans. That's why the Bay of Pigs was a failure. That's why there never was a Cuban people's uprising, because they didn't have any fucking money. They didn't have any weapons. You know why? Because all the weapons and all the money that was getting raised for Cuba got diverted to Israel. Okay? Diverted to fucking Israel, a continuation of what I'll call the Sonborn Institute, which had been a large-scale smuggling operation set up by David Ben-Gurion out of New York, stealing all of our post-war surplus, with a guy named Rudolf Sonborn. It's called the Sonborn Institute, if you guys wanted to like go look into this. But yeah, so I went off on a tangent, forgot where I was going with this. But the bottom line is,
they all worked together and were hella tight and knew each other.
There you go. Exactly. This is Emilio Santana. Emilio Santana.
People, you just look at their face and you're like, obviously you're a murderer. Like, what? How did anyone miss this?
This is Emilio Santana. He was the shooter at the Daltex, and he was not inside the Daltex. He was actually underneath the fire escape. There's a ledge that you have to get on to climb up to the fire escape, and I'll show you a picture I have. I determined he was standing there, and then and also he drove up to Dallas with Sergio Arcacha Smith, and the two of them were involved in the Rose Cheramy incident, where Rose Cheramy is she's a hooker. She works for Jack Ruby. She works ultimately for Carlos Marcello. She's getting bounced back and forth between Dallas and Miami, working that hooker circuit. And she's with these two guys, and they kick her out of the car somewhere outside of New Orleans, and she gets put to the hospital. And she says, they're going to kill Kennedy. They're going to kill Kennedy. And they think she's nuts, so they throw her into the mental ward at Jackson, Louisiana. And so basically Kennedy gets killed, and they're like, holy shit, she said Kennedy was going to get killed, and he gets killed. So they send the police out to go meet with Rose Cheramy. Rose Cheramy basically gives the aliases of Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emilio Santana. And then, the bartender at a nearby bar that all three of them were at identified Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emilio Santana as the two men who were with Rose Cheramy. So they kick the bitch out of the car. She tells people what's going to happen. They don't believe her. She goes to the mental ward, and these guys go, and they end up in Dallas, where they are shooters in the assassination. And she knew it, and she warned everybody in the hospital, and nobody fucking listened.
Oh my God, I'm so unsurprised, but it's also so sad. She could have prevented all of this, and everyone was like, whatever, you dirty hooker, get in the insane asylum.
And then there were two shooters on the grassy knoll. The first shooter was David Ferry, the key person on the ground in the assassination. I'd say the key person in planning the assassination was probably, Jack Valenti was definitely a big part of it, the guy on the right. So David Ferry fired the first shot. Shot struck Kennedy in the throat. I do not believe it went through the windshield. I believe the angle of the car was coming, and it shot him in the throat without going through the windshield. It went basically around. From there, and this is Jack Valenti. He's the quintessential grassy knoll shooter, and I'll get to him shortly.
On the left, the alien.
That's David Ferry. You see his eyebrows?
It's so fucking weird. What?
Yeah.
What is that?
He painted his eyebrows on because he couldn't grow any hair. Many people think he had alopecia, but I don't think he had alopecia. I believe he was a U-2 test pilot back in the early days of the U-2 program. And those guys fly at 70,000 feet, and the pressurization in their suits, a lot of the early U-2 pilots, the pressurization was so fucking high that they lost all their hair and could never grow it back. And David Ferry was definitely associated with the CIA during this time period. And that's his one feature that everyone talks about with him, is that he was a master pilot. So yeah, Dave Ferry was most likely a CIA U-2 pilot, and he lost all his hair because of the pressurization of the suit. So he had to paint his eyebrows on, and that's what gives him away. That's what gives him away.
I hope everyone's looking at this. It's like your, grandma after she gets dementia trying to put on lipstick or something, like with her shaky hand. It's like really ridiculous looking.
Okay, so the first shot from David Ferry hits Kennedy in the throat. Everyone has seen the Zapruder film when Kennedy lifts his arms like that. So David Ferry is seen by a guy named Ed Hoffman. So Ed Hoffman is across the Stebbins Freeway, and he's right there, and he basically sees a guy fire a shot from the corner of the picket fence, and he describes that person as having worn a black felt hat and a dark blue jacket. Come to find out, when he works with Oliver Stone, like you see this picture on the right here, this is from the setting. This is the set of Oliver Stone's film back in 1991. The man on the left is how he describes the person who fired the shot. The man on the right wearing a railroad worker's outfit. So this is a description of the two men that he sees back behind the corner of the picket fence. And so David Ferrie fires a shot, hits Kennedy in the throat. And you can see from here, the car was about right here. The angle wouldn't have to hit the windshield. It could have, but I don't think it did. I think it went around it because of the angle the car was at. But anyway, Ed Hoffman is back over here across another freeway bridge, by the way. And he sees David Ferrie right here at the Star. Ferrie fires a shot, and then David Ferrie walks, and he gets photographed on the pergola right here. Okay, so now there's something up with this picture, because this same basically capture comes from a different source, and it looks like this, where they blacked out whoever was standing on top of the fucking on top of the pergola. You see that?
Yeah,
They put a
yeah.
black box there, but I found this from a video that shows the person who was standing there. And the person who was standing there looks exactly like the person who was described by Ed Hoffman as having fired the shot. He's just taking his sweet ass time, and he's hanging out on the pergola now. Okay.
And there's some weird midget with like a crown on underneath.
No, I think that's just a blonde woman. She's standing on the ground. That's a blonde woman. Yeah.
Okay.
She's significant, but I haven't really figured out who she is. But she's carrying like a paper sack. Well, she drops the paper sack and runs at some point.
Okay.
But I'm still trying to figure out.
Like make it look like one of those really like ridiculous crowns from like the cartoon Robin Hood that the lion wears. Like that's what it looks like to my brain.
Oh, and it actually looks like there's two people standing there. I just noticed this. There's a second person on the other side. So there's two people standing there talking, and it looks like they're talking to him. But then I find this picture again with David Ferrie walking clearly through the railroad yards. So he obviously goes to the pergola, stops at the pergola, and then walks back through the railroad yards. Now look at this. I found this picture of David Ferrie on the left with this black hat on, and the same hat in the picture on the right, folded up in the back and everything. It's the same fucking guy. Okay, so David Ferrie fires a shot from the picket fence. He throws his rifle to a guy named Andrew Jerome Blackman, who was the guy wearing the railroad outfit. Blackman then breaks down. Blackman is an associate of David Ferrie who came in on a boat from Galveston, associated with the Merchant Marine or some sort of merchant ships, and he was actually smuggling a bunch of heroin into Texas at the time. And then after, it's a long story involving Rose Jeremy, but and Sergio Arcacha Smith and those guys. But basically, Blackman ends up probably catching a ride to Dallas with Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emilio Santana, and he was one of David Ferrie's best friends. And remember, if you're going to kill the fucking president, you're going to use your best friends, your closest inner circle. That's how you identify who was who and what was what. And when you look at dates and times of where people were and all the stuff, it becomes obvious. Everything falls into place if you just can put it into the correct, like not only timeline, but like the correct frame of reference. So, but yeah, so you got David Ferrie, he makes his way back through here, and that's a picture of David Ferrie on the left, and he's wearing the same goddamn hat, probably the same suit as in this photograph here on the right where he's caught in the railroad yards. So a video here of another witness who happens to see David Ferrie as he gets into a car. Okay, so a witness behind the book depository, only identified as Velma. Let me see if I can just bring up a screenshot of this.
She's a lesbian now, by the way.
Oh, yes, I heard.
Yeah.
So, Velma basically sees, and she calls into a radio show back in 2006 on November 22nd. So she doesn't tell anybody this story for like 40 something years. She calls in and says, I saw this guy at the assassination. He was sitting in a car and he had real heavy eyebrows, and she describes the same person that Ed Hoffman describes. And the real heavy eyebrows part is what tipped me off that David Ferrie was in Dallas. Okay. But then what other confirming information do I have that David Ferrie was in Dallas? Well, David Ferrie, when you look into the official story, he allegedly was in New Orleans, had an alibi at noon, a woman named Alice Guidros, who was the secretary for G. Ray Gill, who was Carlos Marcello's lawyer. She basically provides an alibi for Ferrie, says, yeah, he was here at noon. Bullshit, he was not. He had been in Dallas for at least 2 days. He flew in 2 days before the assassination to an airport in Fort Worth. So basically, the guys who he's not supposed to have left New Orleans with yet are standing in Dealey Plaza right after the assassination. Leighton Martins on the left, Alvin Bobouf on the right. These two guys are the guys who allegedly went on the trip with David Ferrie the day of the assassination, and they went ice skating in Houston. Okay, so I will make it a point to get to the Houston story because it's very important in demonstrating that David Ferrie was in Dallas. And if you want to understand anything about the assassination, you have to know David Ferrie was in Dallas and he was a shooter, and that it was his associates in New Orleans who were in the book depository, the Daltex building, and the other shooters who were at the Grassy Knoll, which were Dave Yaris and Jack Valenti. Those were coordinated most likely. Well, Dave Yaris came from Giancana in Chicago. Valenti came through Trafficante. But all of that was organized by the three mob bosses, Trafficante, Marcello, and Giancana, right? So you have David Ferrie, who handled the guys we've already talked about, Leighton, Sergio Cacha-Smith, Emilio Santana, William Seymour, and Lauren Hall. Those guys were all handled by David Ferrie, right? So they were directly connected to him in New Orleans. And then the placement of the other shooters had to have been also coordinated by David Ferrie, even though they were coming in from out of town, because he knew exactly where his guys would be. So he had to be the person to know where the other shooters would go. David Ferrie coordinated the shooters on the ground. That's the only conclusion I can come to. And if he wasn't involved, if he wasn't there in Dallas, then what's the point of him being involved at all? But yeah, so the guys he allegedly leaves New Orleans with that day are standing in Dealey Plaza. It's them, clear as day. And then you have statements from like Jack Martin, who I'm not going to get into Jack Martin. He's another spook down in New Orleans. He tells the FBI Ferrie was in Dallas at least 2 days before the assassination in Fort Worth. So yeah, that's the first shot. Let me see, what else do I have here? This is pretty interesting. This is from a woman named Clara Flournoy Gay, and she basically was a client of Carlos Marcello. And sometime within a couple days of the assassination, she goes to Marcello's office. And this is what the document said. This is pretty fascinating. It says, the day following John Kennedy's assassination, a Saturday, she, Mrs. Gay, went to Gill's office and observed the two female employees were cleaning out Ferrie's desk, because Ferrie had a desk in G. Ray Gill's office. She saw a chart or a sketch, and what caught her eye was the fact that this chart had Elm written on what appeared to be a street. There was also a building on the street, and was a square with letters VIP written in this square. Mrs. Gay stated that she remarked to the receptionist that this should be turned over to the FBI. The receptionist then picked it off the desk and threw it in the trash, stating that it was nothing. Mrs. Gay stated that she then took the document from the trash, stating she would give it to the FBI. Oh yeah, I already said that part. So yeah, so we have a witness who goes into G. Ray Gill's office where David Ferrie worked, who was the lawyer for Carlos Marcello, and she actually sees a freaking diagram of Dealey Plaza in David Ferrie's fucking office, right?
That's
so
crazy. So, and then she tried to take it, and the person like took it back from her. And wouldn't you then just at least go and say, "This is what just happened"? I don't have the document. They took it from me. They wouldn't let me have it, but I saw it.
Right. She ends up going to talk to Jim Garrison years later. So at least the information got out. Yeah. But the woman who took the paper back from her was Alice Guidros, the same woman who provided an alibi for David Ferrie, even though he was clearly in Dallas.
She must have got paid pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So Lawrence Howard, the dark-complected Mexican with numerous bumps on his face, or a pockmarked face, he fires from the sniper's nest. Across from him, let me see. Obfuscation over the holes that were collected, right? So allegedly Oswald fired 3 shots. They collected 3 rifle holes from there, but there's multiple conflicting chains of evidence showing that there were multiple chains of evidence when there should never be, right? So 3 rifle holes were handed off from Officer Day to Sims to Fritz, but then we also have documentation showing that 2 rifle holes made their way from Day to Brown to Williams, right? Ultimately, what you have here is, you see here how it says this is the original. This is the original from the crime scene report showing that they only collected 2 rounds underneath the window, not 3. Okay. It was later on that this actually, they wrote over it with like pen to make that into a 3. Then when you have the actual crime scene reports, and you have to look at the actual crime scene reports by the crime scene officers who investigated, it says right there, 2 spent holes from the 6th floor window. They only found 2 holes. They never found a 3rd. Again, this is from J. Doyle Williams of the FBI. 2 holes plus 1 live round. So we have this huge chain of evidence showing there were only 2 holes. And on top of that, we have J. Doyle Williams' photograph of the 2 holes and the 1 live round. This picture almost gets no circulation whatsoever. I've never seen it anywhere other than the source that I found it. And this is kind of showing proof that there were only 2 holes collected. And why is this important? Because when they go to try to get, when they realize that they need a 3rd hull. All right. So this is like a week, November 27th. It could be in later because these guys backdated a lot of stuff and they lied about a lot of dates and stuff. So who knows when this actually happened? It says when Detective Doherty returned from the Identification Bureau, he returned the 1 empty hull, which I kept in my possession. Several days later, I believe on the night of November 27th, Vince Drain of the FBI called me at home about 1 o'clock in the morning and said that the commission wanted the other empty hull and a notebook that belonged to Oswald. I came to the office and delivered these things to the FBI, and we have Mr. Hostie's receipt for these items. Okay, so the Dallas police turns over the hulls to the FBI, but one of the fucking detectives just decides to keep one and keep it in his pocket.
I just wanted to
Bullshit.
Here. Yeah.
Bullshit. There were only 2. Realized they needed a 3rd. They fabricated it. That's how the fuck that went down.
Wow.
So, yeah, so you got Lauren Hall firing shots from the sniper's nest. Across from him, I'm going to jump around here a little bit. Across from him, 2 to 3 shots, likely striking Governor Conley. And I say this because of the angle that the bullets entered Conley's wrist and his left thigh. They did not come from the same shots that were fired allegedly from the sniper's nest. There were probably 9 to 10 shots fired total. The limo is riddled with bullets. There's all kinds of evidence of covering up crime scene reports of the analysis of the limousine, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, so you got Lauren Hall, who is obviously Lawrence Howard's partner. And remember, these guys work in teams, close teams, because you're not going to bring an outsider in on your operation, right? So then the shooter at the Daltex building. Now check this out. This I thought was pretty awesome. This is the Altgens photo. Is one of the classics. So everyone kind of speculated that there was a shooter probably firing from one of the windows. And so I kind of did this photo analysis and I looked into all these little windows, and there's actually all the little red boxes. There's actually a face in every one of those. Not in this one, but in my other, images that I played with the contrast and stuff, there's a face in every single one of those red squares. However, standing underneath the fire escape, I found what looks like a face and 2 hands emerging from the shadows. And those 2 hands look like they're in a position that they'd be in if they were holding a rifle. Are you seeing that as well, or am I fucking crazy?
No,
absolutely.
The first thing I thought of is that person's holding a gun.
Right. So you obviously can't tell who it is. You can't tell anything except there's a face and 2 hands there. But that was enough for me to confirm that there was a shooter at the Daltex. And I put Emilio Santana there based on, let me see if I can, do I have any? I don't know if I want to get into the slide because I just kind of made this connection very recently. They gave a description of the shooter right after the assassination at Houston and Elm. And most people assume that they're talking about Oswald, but I've determined they were talking about Emilio Santana, and they have a pretty good description of him. But I'm not going to get into that today. It's still kind of fresh, and I still need to work it out. It is going to be in my book, which we'll talk about at some point. But yeah, so this is Emilio Santana, and he's standing underneath the fire escape. And actually, there's somebody talking to him. When you actually zoom in on this, there is someone standing on the ground who is like looking up, and they're talking to him as he's standing there. So he obviously had a handler there with him. And this is like a picture of what it would look like. Otherwise, you can see that this is like where he was standing. Let me see. Okay, let's talk about the Daltex a little bit because it's super important. The Daltex is kind of like the center of the conspiracy, at least as far as the conspirators in Dallas go. So did you know that until late 62 or early 63, the Texas School Book Depository occupied the first floor of the Daltex building? The building they now occupy was known as the old John M. Sexton building. I have almost completed a list of all occupants of the Daltex building for you. Many of them are still there. However, the mass exodus after November 1963 seems to have been to 1801 North Lamar. The Daltex building seems to have been and be a sort of Jewish family affair. At least they were mixed up in each other's businesses, etc. They are mixed up in all kinds of things which don't show up in the records, uranium, etc. Haven't been able to find oil yet, but I'm still looking. The reference there to uranium was reference to a off in the Daltex building. The South Texas Uranium Mining Company was set up out of the Daltex. They allegedly had a bunch of land in South Texas that had uranium on it, to a bunch of people to mine the uranium, right? And then it turned out it had no fucking uranium, and they scammed all those people who rented the land from them. It was a total fucking wash. A bunch of scams were run out of the Daltex, connected to a guy named Morris Jaffe. Morris Jaffe, one of the 3 owners of the Daltex, or one of multiple owners, along with a guy named Sam Bloom. Morris Jaffe also happened to be the best friend of Lyndon Johnson. Okay, so you have this like close-knit clusterfuck of relationships when it comes to Dallas and the oil business and Lyndon Johnson and all these people involved. It's really kind of nuts. So in regards to,
I
go ahead.
always remember that Lyndon Johnson looked super happy when JFK is like dead and they're in the plane or something. And I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah, you're talking about the winking photo.
Did it.
You're talking about the photo with Albert Thomas. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's well, here's the thing. Like, Johnson wasn't involved, in my opinion.
He was happy with the outcome, right?
Yeah, I'd say that much for sure. But let me see here. So from the Daltex, you have 2 shots in Kennedy. I don't know why no one ever talks about this. There's obviously 2 shots in Kennedy's back next to the red dots. People only ever talk about the lower one. And when you look at the FBI report, it has no mention of the upper hole, right? The one below the collar, only the one in the back. And so, yeah, there's an obvious cover-up of how many shots were fired at Kennedy. One of the shots from the Daltex actually struck the concrete shattered, and it hit James Tague in the face, and he was cut by it. So, let me see here. Okay, so this is in regards to the Daltex. Who owned the Daltex in 1963? Morris Jaffe did. Who is Morris Jaffe? Aside from the fact that Mr. Jaffe was one of Lyndon Johnson's closest friends and the owner of the Daltex building, he was an interesting and unusual character whose story is pertinent in this big picture. Jaffe was a native of San Antonio, Texas, of Mexican Jewish parentage, and he was an aircraft engineering officer during World War II. After returning from the Army, Jaffe and a friend, David Martin, started a construction company. A few years later, they built a vast number of barracks at Lackland Air Force Base near San Antonio, which upon final inspection fell short of contract specifications. Okay, so they pulled another scam involving the Air Force, and they built a bunch of fucking barracks that were a bunch of junk. I'm sure they got a big paycheck for that too. So, yeah. Okay, so moving on. This is an image from the Nix film, and this is an image, I believe, of Dave Yaris. Okay, so this was originally cropped out of the film and not released until sometime in the 1990s. So they knew that there was somebody there, a shooter, probably because of the fact that they cropped it in the first place. So there I have Dave Yaris, who I talked a little bit about earlier. And so Dave Yaris, white shirt with gray hair, running back from where he fired a shot. I believe this is the shot that ends up getting dug out of the ground. I believe he missed Kennedy and struck the grass on the other side of the street. That image is pretty famous. People have seen the image of the bullet getting dug out. And so then I find this clip here, this little GIF. Look at the guy on the left side with the white shirt and the gray hair. I'm pretty sure that's Dave Yaris. I've seen pictures of Dave out there, but that matches the description. About 6 foot tall, heavy set guy, 60s. And if I'm correct, and this is actually him, it's clearly wearing a white shirt here, clearly wearing a white shirt. So I believe that's Dave Yaris. It is a huge backstory to him that I fully researched. I'm not going to go into it today, but I'm convinced that he was that shooter between the pergola and the fence. And I put him in Dallas for the reasons I already mentioned, plus a whole bunch of stuff revolving around a guy named Marion Meharg, who kind of spills the beans on him, not identifying him as Dave Yaris, but spilling the beans on a guy named David Leon Miller, who I had connected to Dave Yaris already. So
he looks, even in this picture here, this mugshot or whatever this is, from the side, you can see he hunches his shoulders up, right? His head comes forward. That posture is in that little GIF you played as well. So
yeah,
seems like him to me too.
Yeah. So then you have this. There have also been reports that Jack Ruby's boyhood friend, and it's another thing, Dave Yaris and Jack Ruby grew up together. That's one of the reasons I believe he was picked. There have also been reports that Jack Ruby's boyhood friend from Chicago, Dave Yaris, was also registered at the Cabana that night. So the Cabana Inn was basically a mob-run hotel in Dallas that a whole bunch of these guys stayed at the night before. what he says here. Dave Yaris was checked in at the Cabana. Yaris was at the time a prominent figure in Chicago's syndicate anti-Castro Cuban nexus in Florida Teamster officials. According to Holt, Chauncey Holt is who he's talking about, whose brother was also a Teamster official. It wasn't that the connected mobster stayed at the Cabana, which was owned by Doris Day and her attorney, Jerry Rosenthal, whose partner, Dwayne Clark, shared office space with Jim Braden. Jim Braden is a courier for Meyer Lansky, head of the mafia. So, right, all these people are connected to the mafia one way or another. Back in the 60s, your mom was connected to the mafia. Seriously, everybody was connected to the mob back in those days. But, yeah, so Dave Yaris, actually, he checked into the Cabana under the name of Murray Miller. And Murray Miller is basically, when you research Murray Miller is a higher up in the Teamsters who ran the Teamsters, or was like number 2 in the Teamsters, Miami, but there is no such person. That's actually an alias used by Dave Yaris. So when Dave Yaris, one of his aliases, checks into the Cabana in Dallas the night before, it's kind of obvious that he was fucking there, right? So, and we have another witness who actually saw a shooter there at that location, and this was from Penn Jones's Forgive My Grief. Talks about a 14-year-old boy who actually saw a shooter in that location. And so this is Lenny Patrick here on the left. Lenny Patrick was lifelong partners with Dave Yaris. He'd been doing hits with him going all the way back to like when they both lived in Chicago when they were teenagers. So many people believe that a guy named Bernard Barker was actually on the knoll and seen fleeing from the knoll in a pickup truck. But Bernard Barker, I don't have any evidence was in Dallas, had anything to do with this. And when you look at these two guys, they're virtually twins. Yeah. So I believe the person who was identified as Bernard Barker by the witness in Dallas was actually identifying Lenny Patrick. It'd be easy to mix that up.
Yeah.
And then this just talks about the phone calls between Robert Bernard Baker, Jack Ruby, Lenny Patrick, and all these guys, right? They're alibi phone calls, right? The mob's not fucking stupid. If they're going to be killing somebody, they're going to have other people make phone calls for them from their phone numbers, obviously, because they know the records are going to get pulled, right? Yeah. So that's that's Dave Yaris. I'm done with him. And now the shooter on the grassy knoll, who everyone wants to know who it is, Jack Valente. Jack Valente fired the shot, and he was either at the very edge of the picket fence, or he was on the overpass. I can't seem to account for the reason why Ed Hoffman didn't see him, even though Ed Hoffman saw and clearly described David Ferry. I can't explain why Ed Hoffman didn't see Jack Valente. If Jack Valente was not at the grassy knoll, he was somewhere else in front of the president's car, possibly in the tunnel underneath the overpass, right? So this I still need to look into more, but I was sent a video by a witness who had never come forward that was recorded probably sometime in the 90s, who basically said he saw a rifleman come out of the tunnel of the overpass. And so who knows? There's still some, logistics I need to work out, but I know that the person who delivered that fatal shot to Kennedy was in fact Jack Valente. And I'll go into Jack Valente's background a little bit. So he definitely worked for the CIA. At the time of the assassination, he was actually running a PR firm, an advertising firm down in Houston called Weekly and Valente. Okay, so he's basically, if you go back in his life, he worked for starting at the age of 15. So going back to the 1930s, Jack Valente worked at Humble Oil, which was owned by Prescott Bush and George Bush. Right, so he worked as an office boy at the age of 15. I get the feeling they probably fucked him a whole bunch, because Jack Valente ends up being an extremely homosexual, even though the official story won't acknowledge that, his life story won't acknowledge that, his history won't acknowledge that. There's enough information on Jack Valente to know that he most certainly was gay, and that his children were not his children, and his wife was most certainly only his wife in name. So
he was their little cool boy.
Yes. Basically, after working for Humble Oil, he goes to the University of Houston. He ends up going to World War II, where he's allegedly a bomber pilot, but there's no evidence that he's a fucking bomber pilot. And there's some contradictory information on what he actually did. But he was obviously trained as a spy, probably an assassin, had to have been, because I've tracked him to a couple other assassinations. As long as I have this one alias that as soon as I can make a positive ID on this alias as Jack Valente, I can crack open a dozen other murders that I can link to him. So that's the one thing I need to work on as soon as I finish my book. But this memo here basically talks about, it's a memo to Mr. Moore from CD Deloach to the FBI, and subject Jack J. Valente. You see how there's a circle there after the J? It's because he left out a name. There's another name that's not in this report, and every time Jack's name is written out there, is a little circle there indicating that the name is missing, and that name is Malachi. So Walter Jenkins called me from the White House at 12:40 p.m. today. He mentioned that the president planned to move several people in federal agencies over on the White House payroll. Captioned individual is one of these people. You see, because Jack Valente went to work for Lyndon Johnson when? Starting on November 22nd, 1963. He is on Air Force One with Lyndon Johnson as they flee the scene. As Lyndon Johnson's being sworn in, Jack Valente is kneeling in the background of that photograph. So that's why this is important, because Jack Valente, who's supposed to be just a civilian working at an ad agency down in Houston, they had to send a memo to transfer his government payroll over to the White House. Okay? What other agency could that possibly be?
Right.
Right? Nobody. The fucking CIA. Okay? So Jack Valente was definitely CIA. And to me, this is as close to proof as you're going to find that. It's definitely proof he was already working for the government in some kind of respect, right?
Right.
So FBI probed Hollywood's Jack Valente for mob ties, and they found them. Okay? They found them. Jack Valente's mob ties are so fucking deep. Both his parents were mobsters, connected to longstanding mob families. And ultimately, the Valentes in Houston answered to Trafficante because they were originally out of Tampa. And when you start to dig into the people who surrounded the Valentes, like the Dinersteins and the Caltaguerones, you'll find these families around the same time moved from Tampa, or branched out, I guess you'd say, from Tampa to Houston, but they stayed under the command structure of Santos Trafficante, passing from senior to junior. So yeah, Jack Valente was mob and he was CIA. Okay. I believe there was homosexual blackmail on Lyndon Johnson that was orchestrated by Jack Valente. Jack Valente was definitely gay. He definitely had been hooking up with Lyndon Johnson. There were reports of people coming into Johnson's bedroom to get him up in the White House, and like Valente is like pulling his pants up and stuff. Like, so yeah, I mean, that stuff definitely happened. But there were some photographs of Johnson that the FBI was like pulling the hair out of their head, trying to, get a hold of the originals and all this stuff. Why would they do that over regular pictures? They wouldn't. They obviously were of something inappropriate. And it was Valente's photographer friend who had taken the photographs. So yeah, I believe that they were taken specifically for blackmail purposes, because I don't believe for a split second that Valente worked for Johnson. I believe Johnson worked for Valente. That's how important this guy was.
That makes so much sense, and it said, so then it was just like being gay. Now it's like, that's not enough, right? You can be Hunter Biden with a crack pipe and with like very young girls and like no one cares. So what's the blackmail now? Obviously it's very different, but at that time that was enough. That was more than enough.
Yeah. They had the goods on Valente, and they knew that he was gay, and they knew there were confidential informants who had spilled the beans on him with a couple different guys. So yeah, definitely gay. And I believe he had homosexual blackmail on Lyndon Johnson. So this here just indicates that the entire time that Valente was in the White House, which was up until late 66, he never had a security clearance at all. But when he leaves the White House, he is then granted a security clearance, which he held for how long? The rest of his life. So if you're leaving government service to go work for the MPAA, a private organization which controls Hollywood, why do you need a security clearance? And why did you get to keep it for your whole life? Well, because obviously he was rewarded. Well, he needed to get the fuck out of Dodge. 1966, I'm trying not to go off on a tangent here, but 1966, they were onto him for other things, his relationships, and particularly with his former brother-in-law, who had been pulled into a murder trial. So he was kind of they were forcing him out of the White House. He knew he had to go. But I also believe at the same time, he was rewarded by his real employers, the people who he really answered to, the CIA and who they really answer to, on top of the Jewish interests in Hollywood. Then, he left in 66 and he becomes the head of the Motion Picture Association of America, where he ran Hollywood from DC. His office was in fucking DC. He never lived in Hollywood, right? So that should tell you everything about who runs Hollywood. He ran Hollywood from 66 until 2004. 38 fucking years. So let me put that in different context. Every motion picture you ever saw growing up as a kid, every television show you ever saw growing up as a kid, everything that had a movie rating attached to it, Jack Valenti created the movie rating system. Every bit of Hollywood propaganda that you absorbed growing up was under the direction of Jack Valenti, with no exception.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
It's totally insane.
One of the most powerful people of all time. Basically.
Of all time.
Yeah.
Of all time. And so here's some of the references. Like, this is the closest you'll get to a reference to his other middle name, like Mel. His real name is Joseph Malachi Valenti, or Malachi Valenti, but he went by Jack Joseph. All right, so there's a couple references here, and there's probably a couple other aliases that they have associated with him. When you get, everybody should read the Jack Valenti file. It's the best fucking FBI file there is. It's got so much good stuff in there if you know what to look for.
Wow.
What else do we have here?
We have a question actually before you go on in the chat. T-Leaves wants to know what you think about the video showing the driver turning around and shooting.
It's fucking CIA propaganda, and I don't even want to say anything else about it. Like, that's just garbage. There's no shooter in the storm drain. If it sounds stupid, it's probably stupid. Okay. So, what was this? Oh yeah, this was he was actually on the books as being like press secretary for Nixon for like 3 fucking years. But he got a paycheck, but he never worked one day. Crazy, right?
Like, I'm gonna need a little bit more money, so make up a job for me.
Right. I'm gonna skip some of the more background stuff on him and get to the relevant stuff. This I found this was kind of crazy because I kind of put 2 and 2 together on Jack Valenti having been the shooter on the grassy knoll. This is probably sometime in 2020. And so I'm looking for references to Jack Valenti on the grassy knoll, and I find this on a forum. This is fucking hilarious. So let me just start off by saying Dave Yaris, his birth name was Dave Miller. Okay. Dave Yaris was really an alias, but that's just how everybody called him. His birth name was Dave Miller. He died in like the fucking 80s. All right. So sometime in 2004, somebody posted this on a movie forum, posting as Dave Miller. And they said, the whole time y'all are talking about Glickman, who Glickman was the guy who took over the MPAA after Jack Valenti left. So he goes, the whole time you're all talking about Glickman, he's like, I'm thinking Jiminy Glickman, aka Martin Short. That would be fun. Jack's had an amazing career in spite of being the 3rd shooter from the grassy knoll. Peace, Dave Miller.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously there's no evidentiary value here.
But
somebody knew something.
And some either that person knows, or it's actually him being like, yeah, here, you can have this little nugget.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. But that I found pretty goddamn fascinating. So let's dig into like where Jack Valenti said he was that day. So everybody remembers where you were at these key events, like 9/11, everybody knows. Kennedy, everybody fucking knows, right? Shuttle disaster that happened, like everybody fucking knows, right? So everybody's always supposed to know exactly where they were when these things happen. And Jack Valenti, I even have an interview where he says it was etched in his mind, the events of that day, right? So you know the guy's full of shit. So in his first statement that he gives, remember, over 40 years, he gave 1 million interviews, and he never gave the same story twice. So here he says he rode serenely in the motorcade in the 6th car following the open convertible. Okay, 6th car. Then he gives another interview where he says that he was with Evelyn Lincoln and Liz Carpenter, 8 cars behind the motorcade, right, behind the limousine. So then he gives another statement where he says, there at the airport, we formed the motorcade. I found myself in a large car with Evelyn Lincoln, secretary to the president, Pamela Turner, aide to Mrs. Kennedy, and the irrepressible Liz Carpenter, chief of staff to Mrs. Johnson. We were 6 cars back from the president's open convertible. Okay, so he's in a large car, and they were 6 cars back. Another interview he gives. From left field, we got into a motorcade. As I recall, I got into a small bus. Liz Carpenter, Pamela Turner, Evelyn, other people, blah, 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 with him. We got aboard this smallish van, and we got in the motorcade. I guess we were 12 or 14 cars from the front of the line. The fucking guy doesn't ever give the same story twice. First, he's in a large car. Very different. Then he's into a small bus. Then, when you pull the actual official story on where Jack Valenti was, he's listed as having been in the party bus, 24th in line. But he wasn't on the party bus. I'll show you where the fuck he was. So let's see how he pulled this off. So Jack's got to be around here somewhere where he's out of view from Ed Hoffman, possibly close to this little diagonal portion overpass, and his shot takes off Kennedy's head. Okay, so you have this image here. This is the president's limousine. The president's already been shot. Jackie Kennedy is trying to get the piece of bone, the skull fragment, off the back of the car. She wasn't trying to escape the vehicle. She was trying to get a piece of bone fragment, which she held until she got to Parkland. That's Clint Hill on the back of the car. He's the Secret Service agent who ran up front to the vehicle. However, when you dig into like the documentation on what these individual Secret Service agents did, the stories conflict with the Zapruder film. We've got at least 2 or 3 Secret Service guys running up to the president's limo and then running back. But none of that is in the Zapruder film. Strange, huh? So, also, there's some misinformation here. It says Hickey has an AR-15 Colt 223. That is not correct. That is a false statement. We'll get to why here momentarily. So, the president shot, and as you can see here, you have the lights in the front car. This is the lead car, and in it are like Forrest Sorrells and Curry and the Secret Service guys and guys from the Dallas police and the Dallas sheriff, right? So they're obviously in on this, and you'll see how when I get through this. But you'll see that they're braking, and they have their taillights on. And this is right when Clint Hill is getting up on the back. But you'll see sometime between here and when they pass them through the underpass, there's some kind of like leapfrog going on with their vehicles. Because you'll see you have the lead car is trying to jump around the limousine, which is, when you watch the video, that's what's happening. So at some point, the limousine zoomed past the lead car, but then the lead car is attempting to make a jump around the limousine once again. Okay, so this I'm blown away that no one has ever figured out. But what I'm going to show you next is so goddamn obvious to me. And if I'm crazy, please just tell me I'm crazy. So in the next shot, let's go back here to Dealey Plaza. Look who's on the side of the Secret Service car. You got 2 guys. You got John D. Jack Reedy, who is this guy in the front, and you have Paul E. Landis, who is this guy. They're about the same height. They're about 6 foot tall. 2 fucking white guys. Okay, these guys couldn't get any whiter. They're translucent practically. These are the guys who were supposed to be on the side of the Secret Service car. Okay, but when you jump to this photo where you see that the lead car is trying to jump around the limousine, if you zoom in, you'll find that John D. Jack Reedy, not Hickey, is the one in the back seat with the AR-15. Okay, and then you have another person on the side of the car, but you only have one, and this person here has a flat top. Okay, zoom out just a little bit; it's clearer to see. That's John D. Jack Reedy. He, even in his interviews later on, he talks about the AR-15. It wasn't Hickey, so that's an obvious lie by the government. But there's only one person standing there, right? So Paul E. Landis hops in, John D. Jack Reedy hops in, and so now we have another person on the outside of the car. So what did they do? They obviously picked up a passenger at some point prior to this moment, because this guy here has a flat top, and as you'll see, he has glasses. And this is not the person who was on the side of the car. It's not John D. Jack Reedy, and it's not Paul E. Landis.
Yeah.
It's a guy with a flat top, and he's got glasses. Okay, so if you look at the back seat if you look at the limousine here, okay, if you look at this is the rim of the upper edge of the windshield of the limousine. Here you have a head hanging over the side. That's Clint Hill's head. He's already on top of Jackie here. Okay, so that's Clint Hill's head hanging over the side. But yet you seem to have a person who is higher than the rim of the upper edge of the windshield, and they're definitely in front of the limousine here, because they're holding something, right? So it looks like there's a person wearing a black jacket and a black hat, and their arm is going out this direction, and it's holding something at a 45-degree angle that's about this long.
Yeah.
That looks like a fucking rifle to me.
Yeah.
That looks like a rifle to me. And that's exactly what it is. So what happens is, sometime between pulling the trigger and taking off Kennedy's head, Jack Valente either goes over the top of the knoll or somehow cuts through the like right here, when you look at this, like the center posts, it's the same. They're open, right? So there's columns. So it's open between the tunnel and the underpass. Okay. So at some point, Jack Valente had to have gotten out of the fucking from the knoll or wherever he was with the rifle and made it to this point. Now, why do I say it's Jack Valente? Well, besides the fact that I already went over all the stuff showing he didn't have a goddamn clue where he was, when you zoom to the next photograph in the series, what you'll find is there's not one person on the side of the car, there's two. And that is unquestionably the man on the right with the flat top and the glasses is David Morales, the legendary David Morales. And the person on the left is the one and only Jack Valenti. Yeah. And David Morales is only 5'9" tall. Jack Valenti is 5'4", two fucking short guys. Yeah. That is them on the side of the car, which means that David Morales, they picked him up. The Secret Service picked him up at some point. And then the limousine picks up Jack Valenti at some point where he's standing in the back of the limo with the fucking rifle. And then in the next photograph, what I believe happens is you get the white car, the lead car with Curry and Decker and Forrest Sorrells and these guys. They pull around the limousine because it gives the limousine an opportunity to slow down or stop. Okay? And it's at that moment that Jack Valenti hops out of the back seat of the limousine, runs around to the front of the Secret Service car, and gets on the side with David Morales. Now, this makes perfect sense. And if you'll see in the next photograph in this series, you'll have the limousine jumping around the lead car once again. This is as it's passing the Stemmons Freeway at the next overpass, right after that one. So, but these are these guys, John D. Jack Reedy and Paul Landis, two of the whitest fucking guys you're ever going to see. And then when you look at who's on the side of the car, that is not a white guy. That is David fucking Morales. I've looked at 1,000 pictures of him. He's a dark-skinned Hispanic, and that's Jack Valenti. You know, I've looked at 1 million pictures of Jack Valenti. Clearly him. And then the greatest thing is when you look at what happens next. So you got Emory Roberts driving the car, right? Or Samuel Kinney driving the car, and Emory Roberts is squished up against the passenger side. And here, if you look at this picture, there's only two people in the front seat, right? You got Emory Roberts and whatever the fuck the guy's name is. I always forget these two guys' names. I always get them mixed up. But there's only two people in the front seat. From here, now there's a third person in the front seat. And Landis, with the rounded haircut, is back on the outside of the car. And Reedy is still holding the goddamn AR-15 in the back of the car, right? But now you got a third person. So obviously what happens is David Morales dips. He obviously gets off the car. As they're doing the shenanigans, he just fucking walks away, hops off. Makes perfect sense. And then Jack Valenti hops in the front seat, and then they head off to where? They head off to Parkland Hospital. Now, what happens at Parkland Hospital? Jack Valenti finds his way into the basement of Parkland Hospital, where he is then fetched by Cliff Carter, who's an associate, closest associate at the time of Lyndon Johnson, right? So what happened in the basement of Parkland Hospital? They found the magic bullet. So Valenti, who numerous times puts himself in the basement of Parkland Hospital immediately after arriving there and prior to meeting with Johnson, which was at about 1 o'clock. So, yeah, to me, the series of events is pretty goddamn clear. Jack Valenti shoots the president from the grassy knoll or possibly somewhere else in front of the president and off to the right, possibly the tunnel. He then makes his way into the back of the president's limousine where he's picked up by Greer. Greer was the driver of the limousine. So he gets picked up by Greer. They do the leapfrog. Valenti then hops out of the limousine and then makes his way over to the Secret Service car right here where he's photographed in the McIntyre photo. And then the next photograph here, Valenti is in the front seat where he then puts himself at Parkland Hospital. And that's where the Secret Service car went, to Parkland Hospital. So to me, the series of events from pulling the trigger on Kennedy to where their magic bullet got planted. And remember, the magic bullet isn't the magic bullet. So the CE-399, which is the magic bullet, the bullet that obviously never hit a goddamn thing, that bullet was swapped out by the FBI. Because the original bullet that was found was a pointed tip 303 round, okay? It was fired from an Enfield 303. Shortly after that bullet is recovered, an Enfield 303 rifle and ammunition is seized from the house of Buell Frazier, who is allegedly the guy who gave Oswald a ride to work that day. You see, so they were setting Buell Frazier up as a second patsy using the Enfield 303 that Valenti used to kill the president, and then he planted Enfield 303 rounds at Parkland Hospital in order to set up Buell Frazier as a second patsy. But then the FBI ended up swapping out the bullet because they didn't need a second patsy. Everything went close enough to plan where they did not need to resort to setting up additional people, which there were a couple. Gilberto Lopez, another Fair Play for Cuba committee guy who was involved in a whole bunch of things down in Mexico City and as well as New York. They were setting him up as a second patsy because he ended up fleeing from Texas into Mexico the day of the assassination, but he had nothing to do with it. Same thing with Buell Frazier. They were setting up additional patsies in case they needed them. And that is what I will share in as far as that goes. But I'm open for questions or anything else.
Well, I have a question. Why why does anybody work with any of these people? Because they clearly, this is the same in movies, right? You'll have all the goons, and the goons are like loyal to the end, and they're just like throwing themselves in front of bullets, and like the good guys are like killing all these goons, and you're like, well, what? You've seen how many times they'll just throw you under the fucking bus, which clearly is what they did to whoever the other guy you just mentioned, and then Oswald. Like, you're theirs until you're not worth anything anymore, and then they're gonna kill you or set you up for something or both. Right? Like, why does anybody trust
Yes.
these people?
I don't know, but I don't think they understood the ramifications back then. You know, the CIA was new in 47. So by 63, you're only looking at like 16 years. Most people had never even heard of the CIA by then, right? Like CIA didn't really, nobody ever heard of the fucking thing till Watergate, which was completely about Kennedy, you know,
Yeah.
bugging the Democratic headquarters. What a dumb cover story.
Why? What do you think actually happened?
A guy named Hank Greenspun, who is, man, I don't want to get too much into Hank Greenspun, but Hank Greenspun directly connected to all the Jews involved through Israel and all the stuff with the smuggling of the nuclear stuff and all the weapon smuggling. Hank Greenspun was the owner of the Sun newspaper out of Las Vegas, and actually one of his employees was a guy named Jean-Pierre Lafitte, who was one of two CIA operatives who used the handler name or code name QJ Win. They were assassination recruiters, but anyway. Hank Greenspun sent a letter basically threatening to out what happened in the assassination because he was pissed off over some political shit. And so he had offices in Las Vegas. And he had an associate in the Watergate Hotel. So when they busted into the Watergate, they were really doing it. Were they bugging the office? Probably, but they were also there to steal documents connected to Hank Greenspun and the letter he wrote threatening to out everybody. So I guess that letter exists. An associate of mine has read it. Nobody has been able to provide me a copy. I can't find a copy. If anybody can find a copy of the Hank Greenspun letter, I will fucking kiss your ass for it, please. I need it bad.
So that means you have to deliver it in person too, so you can.
I actually talked in person to Daniel Sheehan. You know Daniel Sheehan, the professor who. He worked on Watergate, and he's got a whole course on JFK and stuff. I met him at a conference, and I showed him my work, and I actually asked him right to his face about the Hank Greenspun letter. He has the Hank Greenspun letter, and he won't release it to me or anyone else for that matter because he's a fucking shill. They're all shills. They're all shills, okay? Anybody out there talking Kennedy except me is a shill.
Or they're at least not as intelligent or something.
Or something.
Which is possible. There's so wait, I want to talk about your book too, so we can't forget that. But I also want to know, like, is there any meaningful difference between like the mob and the government? Because it seems like there's not. It seems like they're literally the same organization. One's private.
There's like it's like a Venn diagram with the overlap, you know, it's one of those deals. But yeah, like back from the mid 40s through the early 70s, like the Mossad, the CIA, and the mafia, and more organizations, the Corsican mob, you know, the fucking triads. Like there's other organizations, right? But as far as America goes, like you cannot separate the CIA, the mafia, and the Mossad in the 60s. You just can't do it. They're all basically because the mob's run by fucking Jews. Everyone thinks the mob's run by Italians. No.
You're like, no, those are the people who are like doing the grunt work, basically.
Those are the grunts. The Italians were the grunts. But the reality is, post 1931, the mob was run by Meyer Lansky, and he was a Jew. And by the 1940s, he had a personal relationship with David Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin and all these fucking guys. Mickey Cohen, the mobster out in L.A., Menachem Begin was his personal fucking rabbi and would come to LA to do money, to raise money for the fucking Israelis, right? Like all these fucking arms shit for the Cubans. You hear Kennedy people talk about the anti-Castro Cubans. It's a front, right? So all that shit was going to the Israelis. The Israelis are behind everything, every goddamn thing. Like if it fucking rains, it's because they got a rain machine. Okay, I swear they are behind every horrific act on the planet for the last 100+ fucking years. And people are like, oh, well, Israel's only been around since the fucking 40s. Well, yeah, but the same people who founded Israel have been committing terrorist attacks since the late 1800s and infiltrating governments since the late 1800s. So yeah, like,
so this is
Israel's got to go.
This is why people also have to go watch the previous episode that you came on and did, why Bodies Don't Burn and Other Facts, because you go into a lot more of that, which I think is fascinating and really important for people to know. It'd be fun to do a whole show just on that, like really just like mapping it out for people and showing them visuals just to like make it even more clear. But why this is maybe the most obvious, but I don't know if it's maybe answered well enough in most people's minds. Like, why Kennedy? Why did they need to assassinate him so much? A lot of people think there's this like magical ritual thing, and you can't really look away from that part of it, because it can't be accidental, all of those different aspects, but that also pins it back on the same group of people that you're referring to, as they love their magical rituals, right? But why Kennedy?
Well, because Kennedy, his number one priority was the nuclear deproliferation. He wanted to get rid of nukes around the world. Israel's number one priority was to get a fucking nuke. Like, come on, like, you haven't, and move unstoppable force here. If it wasn't Kennedy, Israel wouldn't be here today, because Kennedy knew about Schonborn. He knew about fucking NUMEC. He knew that they were stealing uranium from us to fucking use in their nuclear reactor. He knew everything. And he was like, fuck these people. They're pieces of garbage. All they ever do is lie. And so he was going to make sure they didn't ever get the bomb. And he was going to cut all aid to Israel. And they couldn't have that, because Israel is a fucking two-bit, second-rate fucking parasite of a nation who would never be able to stand on their own 2 feet without us. The split second that they lose American support, financial and or otherwise, they're just going to get pounced on by their fucking neighbors. Like the Arabs hate them, right? Because they're a bunch of fake fucking Jews, right? The Israelites were black. The original Jews were black. Okay, there wasn't a white fucking Jew on planet Earth till 740 AD. Okay, they're descendants of the Khazarians, right? And when you look at the fucking official history timeline, it totally matches up with exactly what happened in the 1200s with the Russians driving the Khazarians into Europe. I mean, there's no connection between the fucking any Jew on the planet and Israel. There's no connection between fucking Judaism and the Hebrew Israelites and modern day white people at all. If you're fucking white, you're 99.99% descendant of Europeans. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going off on a tangent. Sorry about that.
It's true though, and it's good, because again, I don't think most people have heard about it, and a lot of people's brains just shut off because they've been told like you can't even mention that Jews even exist. You can't say Jewish or Khazarian or anything, because just thinking about it makes you an anti-Semite somehow. We're sure of that much. But do you have, and did you ever have, if not now, the conspiracy wall where you got to like smoke cigarettes and like point at things and there was like red yarn? Because I feel like the pieces you put together are like a massive amount of interconnecting information. So I like to imagine it, at least.
I have a lot of little ones.
Okay.
I have a lot of little ones.
That's good. We all need that picture in our head. And I also am wondering, since you've looked so deeply into this and you've seen just how corrupt and how garbage everything is, and how this was pulled off and how simply and easily it could have been seen and put together, and maybe some other things like letting some evil person run Hollywood for all this time. I don't know if that could have been stopped, but all of that was ignored on purpose. Is there any way to keep this from happening again? Is there any way to make it known just how dark this rabbit hole is?
That's the one question I can't answer. I don't know. I don't even know anymore.
I don't either. I know that the book is going to help at least do that somewhat, though, and I'm really excited about it. I know I haven't read any of it. For some reason, you've let Charlie read some of it. Charlie Robinson, our other co-host on Day Zero, and he loves it. So I'm excited about it. How far are you? When is it coming out? What's the deal with the book?
Well, it just keeps getting longer as I keep writing it. Like I keep thinking, oh yeah, I should include that, and then I say, oh fuck, I got to add a chapter for that, and it's like, at one point I said I would be like, I'm like 2/3 done, but I'm probably closer to half done. But I got probably over 300 pages already, so
that's amazing.
It's coming along.
I know there's so much more in it than we could have touched on today in this presentation. Even just based on the slides you had, there's very little that we went into, in fact, and there's so much more that people could go into. And I know you also have so many other things you do besides the JFK, even though the JFK work is your primary work right now at the moment, and this book is the big thing that you're working on. But tell people what else you have going on and where to find you.
So I managed the Forbidden Knowledge Network, which is, we have about 7 or 8 shows now. And you can go to forbiddenknowledge.news and you can go listen to all that stuff. But I do Day Zero. I do a show with the X Cube 420. We do pop culture reviews. That's pretty fun. But CoryHughes.org is where you can find all my stuff. and that's about it. The book
Are
will be
you
out
not doing
within a couple months.
understanding propaganda anymore?
No, I do it, but it's only been like once a month. I've just been doing so many other things. It's been hard for me to focus on that, and it's not going anywhere. So, but anybody who wants to learn more about Kennedy or interact with me, I have a private JFK Telegram channel, and any donation over $5 through Buy Me a Coffee. If you go to buymeacoffee.com/forbidden, any donation over $5 gets you access to a couple. Actually, I have a lot of stuff posted there. I have all kinds of links to my research, and the Telegram link to get you into our private group. There's only about 15 of us, but we have a great time in there. Some really awesome people sharing some great information.
That is pretty cool. It's actually better to have, I feel like, less people at a higher caliber than it is to have like a massive amount of people at sort of the lowest level. It allows you to actually learn something, reflect, and like share some cool stuff. So I think that's actually nice. I mean, it's going to get bigger, so whatever. But for that time where things get to be like that, I feel like it's golden.
Yeah, it's nice.
It is. Well, that's awesome. CoryHughes.org. The link is below you wherever you are watching or listening. The book is coming. I'm sure we can have you back again, hopefully around the launch date, and maybe review some of this and see how it all ties together again. But, what are your final thoughts that you want to leave people with as an overall cherry on top of the Rocky Road, Sunday that we just created?
Kennedy is like the center of the universe. And I find it difficult to understand the state of the world today without understanding Kennedy. And so I just have to assume there's a lot of people out there who have no fucking idea what's going on in the world today. And you really, it doesn't even start with Kennedy. You can go back hundreds of years to start. Really, the study of Kennedy starts in the late 1800s. Doesn't even start. It starts before he was even fucking born. So when people try to study anything, don't be limited to that thing, right? Like you have to have context. Like anybody who's going to study any single aspect of history has to understand the encompassing eras. You got to understand a lot. So don't limit yourself to, if you're interested in a subject, to just studying that subject.
Very good point and well said. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the rebel historian, Cory Hughes. Cory, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. It's been awesome.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, you're a rock star. Everybody loves it, by the way. Everybody's like, holy shit, how's this guy? I'm like, how do you remember all of that? You've got mind like a steel trap. So it's very cool that we get to just like gleam off of that and gain all of that from you. Thank you for distilling it for us.
No problem.
Awesome. Well, you think you know a thing because you spent time with it and looked at it fully. And until you see how much you missed the first time you looked. So you look again and it surprises you just how much detail and nuance was hidden beneath even the full view you gave it, until you walk away satisfied that you've truly done your due diligence this time. And then something pops out that you never noticed before, drawing you back in yet again to review the entire thing. And you find even more you never noticed. We do best when we remember how many times this has been true for us and begin to apply it to literally everything we ever encounter, experience, or dive into. As there will always be more to know, more to see, more to learn, and we will always do best to continue to come with new eyes, to literally review as often as it pops into our mental sphere, and until your eyes constantly see the world anew in every moment. Travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside at first.
I heard the Bilderbergers called you. I was like, hello? Hello? Ain't nobody answering this shit, man. I mean, for real, man. I must have hung up. The phone rang again. I was like, hello? Ain't nobody even answering, dog. Some real shit, man. They tapping my telephone. It's really the real when you step to the plate. And it ain't too late to change the ways of being fair. Humans create with creativity, so make what you create to shine through. All niggas wanna do is shine. Make your few rhymes, but the death to the blind. Those left behind, I crept and I climbed to the top of my mind. And I found I've been toxically conformed, and I was never warned of the signs. crimes committed as an adolescent. Now I'm captured the system's stressing with aggression and emotions, through passion and emotion to set truth in motion. They gave me Zola for a rainy day, and they gave me Zyprexa to sleep my life away. Society's labeled a man to be bipolar. Might as well gave me heroin and Coca-Cola. This is how Western medicine work. This is also how Western religions work. And Americans work 9 to 5. Not asking the questions of how, when, where, what, why. I remain on the quest searching for salvation. What it takes for blood, what the fallen warriors dream of surviving this flood of chaos. Those who continue to judge a book by its cover are way off. Breaking these laws of star prison, reminiscing of pain, taming niggas up in the system. Gotta slip in the law with a cry, nobody hears ya. Chances survive to revive an immortal lie. Breaking these bars of the scar prison, reminiscing of pain, taming niggas up in the system. Gotta slip in the lie with a cry, nobody hears ya. Chances survive to revive an immortal lie.
Work condition to be housebroken in the weekend. Labor all week, pay them, and with the rest, drown away the weekend. Wires and voltages set strategically to dampen chakras. Make sure to take those prescriptions given to you by the doctor. Wash it down with contaminated water. Worship a holy father, eat trash food, remain drained from the slaughter. Mother Nature's out, the Illuminati's daughter. Through molestation, unnoticed by the blind line in every nation. Not allowed to know God is present in each and every individual. Ancient truth forgotten except the Bohemian Grove rituals. Inbred bloodlines created unruly ruling class of elites cold as reptiles. The awoke can even see the signs on the streets. And Christians pass off a fiction of paranoia reaction. 33 supposed to scrolls are laughing right now with Kennedy's assassin. 2 pillars burning. History repeats as I babble. Centuries I change their plans when I'm up in the booth.
Everlasting presence of life got me up in the night, not knowing if I'm wrong or right. Something within me tells me to fight, and it's like I'm trying to find the true nature of being God-like versus religious beliefs, which indeed tells me I'm doomed from day one out the womb. They want us to be consumed with fear, with negative thoughts engineered to fear God, and that's to fear oneself, and that's real. You tell me that I'm imperfect, how is that? When everything's for a reason, you forget that everything is meant to be. But they got us withering away, not knowing sacred geometry, which degrades philosophy of every soul, in which they try to control your mind with limitations, over exceeding your expectations. You'll be considered an outcast with lacerations, so I continue to master patience, creating ways to make it through the Piscean age that's getting close to the Aquarian stage. As I stand strong on my God-given rod, it's my life against all lies to penetrate these imprisoned walls that creates flaws and false laws. So y'all niggas, before you die, before you had the chance to survive, and that's breaking bars of a scar prison, reminiscing of pain, taming niggas up in the system. Gotta slip in the line with a cry, nobody hears ya. Chance to survive, to revive an immortal lie. Breaking these bars of a scar prison, reminiscing of pain, taming niggas up in the system. Gotta slip in the line with a cry, nobody hears ya. Chance to survive, to revive an immortal lie. Breaking these bars of the scar prison, reminiscing of pain, taming niggas up in the system. Gotta live in a lie with a cry, nobody hears ya. Chance to survive, to revive an immortal lie. Breaking these bars of a scar prison, reminiscing of pain, taming niggas up in the system. Gotta live in a lie with a cry, nobody hears ya. Chance to survive, to revive an immortal lie.